Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Samantha Calicchio. I'm the video hostess for the Hidden Tears Project, and I'm here with Sheila Segal, who is an activist, a writer, and a clinical psychologist who works with SPY, Safe Place for Youth in Venice, California, and also with Free the Slaves. Thank you so much for being here with me.
No problem.
Yeah. So you have a book coming out. Can you tell us a bit about your book?
I wish my book was
You
coming
have
out.
a book. You just wrote a book. Yes.
I wrote a book. It's called Grandma's Guide to Tackling Retirement and Global Slavery. Actually, it's called The Badass Grandma's Guide to Tackling Retirement because my writing teacher said I was a badass. It's about the work I've done, how I came at retirement at 66 when I started doing this work, to decide to go to these remote places and work with as an abolitionist, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then the activist parts of my life that got me to do it, because in every writing class I was in, people would say, "But why did you choose to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you just write a check?"
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So you work a lot with homeless youth who have been trafficked, and also with people
Some have been trafficked.
Some have been trafficked, and also with people in other countries who are survivors of trafficking. And you work a lot with trauma.
I do.
What are some outdated ideas that people have about how to heal trauma, and how do you update them?
So I think the whole field of trauma-informed care is changing. I know when I was in graduate school, nobody talked about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of work being done. I think my least favorite, and I definitely have a bias, they're still doing it at the veterans, is immersion therapy, where they keep having the person relive the experience over and over again. The idea that they will become inured to it and it won't bother them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it probably works for some people, but a lot of people just keep getting re-traumatized, and it makes it worse. So there's all kinds of research. I'm constantly taking seminars and reading everything I can about trauma. And I mean, the newest research is to use ecstasy, because you hold trauma in your body, and until you can relax your body, you can't deal with the trauma. And when they control the use of ecstasy, and they do it over a weekend with therapists there, it allows the body to relax enough that the trauma can start to be dealt with.
Wow.
But that's the newest. But there's a lot of other ways. There's EMDR, which is using the finger, a lot of body work. Yoga, 10 sessions of yoga is very good for helping deal with trauma. They use meditation, conscious breathing, drama, using drama, getting people, they use it with youth a lot to get them to take on another role. So when you play another person, you can kind of experience what it's like to be another person. Drumming, anything that changes the brain, and all those things do.
Yeah, so speaking of that, and speaking of the fact that trauma is often stored in the body, is always stored in the body, what have you found to be the most effective in your research, in your work, the most effective physical method for releasing trauma?
Well, the most effective physical one, with the exception of using drugs, is probably yoga. Is really good for trauma. Meditation's good. I don't think there's one. I'm also a counsel trainer. So counsel is a practice that was started, well, it's all over the world, but the one that is mainly at the started at the Ojai Foundation here in California, was based on the Indians, whose name I can't remember, the Lakota Indians. And it's basically, you sit in a circle and there's a center, and you enter into the circle, and there's a talking piece, so that was kind of like the peace pipe. And you pass the talking piece, and you respond to a prompt by a facilitator, and you tell your story. And as people, they're actually using it in prisons a lot, very successfully. And as you tell your story, you begin to realize that other people have the same experience. So whenever I travel, I always teach counsel and bring counsel to the places I go. But I also teach yoga, I teach meditation, I teach active listening because if people don't know how to listen, they can re-traumatize people. And I teach about trauma, what trauma looks like, some of the things that you can see personality-wise, what happens to people who have PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's flashbacks and, nightmares and somatic symptoms and sometimes self-injurious behaviors. I mean, there's a whole list of things that happen as the result of getting post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you, that's the dogs.
Yeah.
So for you, a large part
Angus, no! Sorry, I'm glad this can be edited.
Okay, and we're back, and we have a couple dogs with us today. So part of what you do is you train staff members and local activists in foreign countries, and you train them on how to work with survivors of trafficking. Can you describe the training process?
So the training is a lot. So it's a little bit different. Here I've done talks at hospitals to hospital staff about what trauma-informed care looks like. And I've done the same with some mental health agencies. Overseas, I actually train staff in things like active listening, yoga, which is just amazing because I'm the least flexible person in the world. And I go and show them how to do yoga, but I get them on the floor and we all do it. We use games a lot, so I teach them a lot of games because it helps. There's all kinds of games that you can use, especially when you're working with youth, but anybody who's traumatized. One being you can just walk around and say hello, which seems not a big deal, but you say hello with your eyes downcast. You say hello like you're meeting your best friend. And people who are traumatized don't like to make eye contact. And also culturally, there's a lot of cultures that don't look you in the eye. It's considered, in Ghana, they don't look you in the eye. And so you use games as a way to sort of make people relax. And it's going to be very distracting. Angus, stop. Leave her. Angus, leave her. You can't pet him if I say leave her.
Oh,
leave
sorry.
her. Just turn away. No, stop. Usually they calm down. It's very distracting. So when I go to foreign countries, I start by teaching what trauma looks like, what happens to people who are traumatized, the different reactions to trauma. I talk about people who are prone to get PTSD have poor attachments when they're younger. So if your parents are enslaved and you're enslaved, there's no time for parents to be supportive and give you attention, and then that makes you more prone to PTSD. In the United States, you see a lot of kids who are trafficked right out of foster care. So those are kids whose attachments are not very good because for one reason or another, their parents have given them up. And it's usually the result of drugs or alcohol or some kind of dysfunction. And so they're at risk for PTSD, but they're also at risk. Well, a lot of them in foster care have been beaten or abused physically or verbally. When they age out of the system, there's a lot of times just cut loose. A lot of the youth we see at SPY have been in foster care and just get cut loose at 18.
Yeah. So working with these people who've endured such horrific conditions, specifically talking about the trafficking survivors, how do you know when the healing process has begun, or how do you know when they've reached some level of healing?
You can see it in the change in their behaviors. You can see it in their ability to talk about things, to talk about their feelings. You can see it in their ability to trust, which is huge. Because for people who've been trafficked, they don't trust anybody. In fact, one of the challenges for people who've been trafficked is for people who rescue them, for the workers who rescue them, to be able to form a relationship. And since it's very quick, they swoop in, they gather these people up. It's very hard for them to spend the time it takes to build a relationship. So that makes the work even more difficult. I was in India in an ashram for girls who'd been trafficked. And those girls were living there, and they were teaching them skills, and they were going to school, and they had relationships. And for many of those girls, some of them, they try to get most of them back with their families, which is problematic because if they've been sexually trafficked in countries like India and Nepal, the families don't want them back because they're not pure anymore. So even though it's and that happened with the girls with Boko Haram. Yeah, the families didn't want them back, and with that they felt that some of them were sympathizers or they were worried about it. But that's a real problem. So you try and get them back with their families. Unfortunately, at the ashram, there were two young women. Well, one was about to go back with her family, but there was one young woman who she looked like she was about 27, and the ashram only has girls up to 18, and they didn't know what to do with her because they couldn't get any information from her, and they had me see her, and she claimed she was 19. And and when I suggested that she'd had a difficult time, she was like, what are you talking about? Nothing happened to me. And I saw another woman who was 22 who said she was 14. And I said to her, you know, the doctors say you're 14. And she said, well, I'll be however old they tell me I am. And she had basically lost all those years of her life because she'd been taken from her village, given to an older man in marriage. I think had a child. We think she had a child with him. He died, and then she was taken by traffickers and trafficked for 4 years. And we don't know what happened to the child because she didn't have the child anymore. But she was trafficked for 4 years, and then she was rescued. And she had that whole part of her life was gone from her memory.
Gone.
Yeah.
So horrifying, and it's such a complex issue. If there's one thing that you would have people watching this video take away, one action that you would have them do, what would it be?
It's hard. You know, my first reaction is go to Costco and tell them to stop selling shrimp. That's from from Thailand, and even in Ralph's. I had a whole discussion with the fish guy at Ralph's, and I said, do you know that this shrimp is gathered up by slaves? And he said, I've never heard anything. And there was a woman standing next to him, and so and she's like, what? And we got into a whole discussion. But there is you can just Google how many slaves are in your life, and there's a test, and it asks you, like, do you have a cell phone? Because the chemicals used in the cell phone are mined in the Congo, and they're mined by slaves. They're mined legally, but they're also mined by slaves, and the problem is they can't trace back the supply chain, so they don't always know because they're companies